So the general overview I'll run through, show some examples of the patterns that are used, and we'll talk about the patterns that are anti-patterns, dark patterns, positive patterns, all those sorts of things as we get to them. And then we can talk about actual implementation from a conceptual and technical perspective. And hopefully Mark, who is my colleague, will be able to help with the technical side of things.
Yep.
So with that out of the way, we can talk about what GDPR is. So I don't want to teach anyone to suck eggs here. If I'm not covering it in enough detail, shout. And if I'm covering it in too much detail, please shout. But GDPR essentially is all about the processing of different types of data, different levels of data, personal, private, sensitive, and how you gather it, what you do with it, and how long you keep it. And making sure that the people that you gather the data from are aware that you're gathering that data, aware that what you're going to do with that data, and aware who you're going to share it with, and when you're going to get rid of it. Everyone happy with that concept? Or anyone not happy with that concept? Probably better to ask the negative. E-privacy is very, very close to GDPR. It's more to do with, or at least in this instance, it's more to do with the digital device and how you gather data in a digital realm. Again, what you do with it, who you share it with, and when you get rid of it. And it's also got a really big aspect about consent. So making sure that in a physical world, you're able to say, tick here if you're happy for us to take this data or share your data on a physical form, because people can see that. But in digital world, unless you specifically give people consent, you should not do anything with their data. You shouldn't collect it. You shouldn't set cookies. You shouldn't do all those sorts of things. You shouldn't share it with anybody. So it's informing people that you're trying to do stuff, but also giving them consent so that they don't get forced to do stuff. So that goes into this next section here, goes into that in a bit more detail. If you're going to take any data from a user, you need to get consent. So you need to make sure that if they're coming to your website and they're filling out a form, they know what's going to happen to the data that you put into the form. If it's going to go to MailChimp for a sign up to a mailing list, or it's going to go into your internal databases, they need to be aware of that, and they need to understand how that works. This includes and again, we're focusing specifically on websites here and the common patterns around websites. Cookies that are stored in the browser, that are set by your website, that could or may not be shared with third parties, who may or may not be local, and may or may not be in the European Economic Area. Local storage, which is, to some people, local storage is not a cookie, but to others, it's known as a super cookie, because a cookie can only hold a certain amount of information. Local storage can hold a lot more. But as far as e-privacy and GDPR are concerned, they're the same thing. They are stores of data, which you need to make sure that the user has consent over the use of. And as I mentioned earlier, making sure that you tell people about the transference of any of that data to third parties. Oh, there we go. I can't scroll anymore. So the normal patterns for how cookies are set or used on websites, and this doesn't cover everything, it's just the normal suspects. YouTube, Google, who runs YouTube, set a large amount of cookies. I think there's 12 or 13 cookies they set by default, as well as the 0.5 meg of JavaScript that gets downloaded to the user's device. They have advertising cookies, marketing cookies, analytics, and lots of other stuff in there that essentially is there so that Functionality such as when you finish the YouTube video and it gives recommendations for the next video that the user might want to watch. That tracks, or Google tracks you around every YouTube video that you've watched, if that's the browser that you're logged in as, so that it can customize its recommendations. That is data that's going off to Google, of course. Vimeo is similar, not quite as pernicious, but does a similar thing with recommendations, a similar thing with advertising marketing cookies. Iframes is an interesting one. For a while, there was an interpretation that iframes weren't your bother. You didn't have to worry about them because what you're showing is a different website embedded within your website, so it's not your problem. What they do is up to them. But more recent interpretations have clarified that if you're embedding it into your website, then you're responsible for what it does, i.e. what you're doing with that embed and with the data that that embed then gathers. Microsoft Forms is an often used one there. Twitter feeds, Facebook posts, like buttons, any other socials, anything that you embed within the website where it interacts in some way with the third party is just the same as embedding YouTube or embedding video or popping in a Google Analytics script. Which segues nicely to analytics tools. Google is, of course, the most popular. More than 50% of the web has Google Analytics embedded, and we shouldn't be gathering or setting any statistics or gathering any data using Google Analytics unless the user has given consent for us to do so. The last common source of cookies, on my list at least, is the improvement measurement tools such as Hotjar. And in the same way as Google Analytics, we're gathering data. We shouldn't really do that without the user's consent and at least telling them what we're going to do. Finn?
Just trying the hand-raising thing, which seems to work. Quick question on analytics. You said that just if it's not using cookies, if analytics were not using cookies, is that still the case that we shouldn't gather any data unless we have consent?
Okay, we can get into this in a lot more depth. Let's dig this apart because it's important to cover. So can you elaborate on what you mean?
I just said, well, if you had an analytics set up where you're not setting a cookie, therefore you're not necessarily tracking somebody from page to page, but you're still tracking the fact that people have hit this page from this IP address, or basically standard server logs, I guess, that kind of thing. But more analytical, like you might know that somebody has exited a page on a certain link or whatever. There may be a little bit more than basic server stats, but not setting cookies. Is that still the case that we shouldn't be collecting data from them under GDPR without their consent, or is that too nuanced? Yeah,
this is where it gets either semantic or wonderfully nuanced, depending on how you like to talk about this. So technically, you're not collecting data there, but you are sharing data. So if and I'll pick this apart in a second. So let's talk about maybe a pixel. So there are quite a few new, or let's call them version 3 sort of analytics systems. Version 1 analytics would have been just run the server logs through a tool. In the old days, AW Stats or whatever it was. There's quite a few of those around now. The version 2 analytics would have been the ones that we're used to with Google Analytics and Matomo and other tools that you embed the JavaScript and it gathers that data using cookies. And the kind of version 3 that we're seeing more and more now is using a pixel on the page, which then transfers some information to the analytics tool, but not as much as using a JavaScript solution. So if we're talking about that third sort of solution, and maybe is that what you're meaning?
I guess, yeah. The edge of my knowledge of the subject, really.
Okay.
I'm just wondering if that was even a consideration.
It is. So this is a really long way of answering it. Apologies. It's a long walk. Hopefully it'll be a lovely spot when we get there. Yes, it is an important thing because we're still gathering data and sharing it. So if we're using a pixel, a Facebook pixel, for example, it takes the information about where the user came from, what browser they're using, all those sorts of things, because you're hitting their web server and giving that information away. And you're forcing the user to do that by adding the pixel into the page. So my personal interpretation, and you should check with your DPOs, you should absolutely check this with as many people as you can. But my personal interpretation is that, yes, you're still falling foul of the I'm sharing this data with somebody. And you're not giving the user the ability to consent to that sharing. The second version of that, the Google Analytics gathering tools, absolutely. You're gathering the data, you're sharing the data. Those sort of third generation analytics tools will tell you that they are GDPR compliant. That's their selling point. We don't use cookies, is their selling point. It hasn't been tested in a court of law yet, but every DPO I've spoken to would err on the side of caution, because they don't want to be the ones in the court of law being tested. So we'll come down to the whole case of analytics later. It's a nightmare. But so what does it mean? There are three things that I'm going to add a little essence in here. There are three things that you should, in theory, do to comply with the e-privacy and GDPR interpretation as it currently stands, or as I understand it, at least. The first is to inform the users what cookies you're setting. So that means the whole list, all the details of the name of the cookie, who it's from, who it's being shared with, when it expires, and all that sort of stuff, the really messy, horrible information. The second part is that you need to give the user the ability to consent to which grouping, at least, of cookies that they're able, or that they accept. So if they don't want to have analytics taken from them, they don't have to. But if they do want to help you with, I don't know, some other aspect, it's probably better the other way around. They don't want marketing, but they want to help you with your analytics. They can choose between the two. And the third is that they can change their mind at any point. So this is key when we come to some of the patterns and some of the examples of implementation, that you'll be able to see the functionality is degraded when you don't accept cookies. So as a user, I might be happy with that, or at least content with that, up until I want the extra functionality, turn on the acceptance of cookies to gain that functionality temporarily, turn them off again when I'm finished using it. Now that might be an edge case, and it might just be me because I'm conscious of these things from working with them day to day. But the user has to be able to do that sort of thing. So what that essentially means is that you have to check what cookies you have on the website. There are tools that are available to do that, but you have to continually check as well. So it's easier to use a tool that can scan your website on a monthly basis so that you update your list of cookies automatically, rather than having to manually trudge through every page to make sure nobody's pasted in an iframe from some third party that you didn't know about. Categorize all of the cookies and see what is essential for the functioning of the website, and they can be allowed through without consent. And again, we'll get into that detail when we look at the patterns. Talk to your DPO. Make sure that you talk to your DPO and get them to sign off on this. They'll be the ones having to defend it in future. Block everything that is not essential for the running of your website by default. That varies in different ways depending on what tool you're going to use to implement. I don't think I'm really going to go into tools, but I can mention a couple that we've used in the past, but I don't necessarily want to go down that road too much. Yeah, seriously, block all the cookies, absolutely. Use a service that can auto-block. All right, we will touch upon that slightly. We've used two services. One is called OneTrust. They have a solution called Cookie Law, or Cookie Pro, I think. And the other solution is Cookie Bot, which is a far more lightweight solution compared to OneTrust. Neither of them are a sort of clean, just add a JavaScript, which they are, ironically. They set a cookie, but it's essential. Neither of them are just an add a JavaScript and everything falls into place. There is some changes, or there are some changes you would need to make to your templates, and you'd need to consider that. And Mark can go through that in a bit more detail to highlight what sort of changes they might be. Automated list of cookies, see how long they're set for, and I can show you those, that sort of thing as an example in a few minutes. Then on an ongoing basis, you need to check each month for new cookies that appear or old cookies that have been removed and update your list. And every 12 months, that's the current recommendation, but that could be changed. Every 12 months, you check whether the user is still happy with their current choice. Okay. Anyone want me to cover anything in there? I know it was a bit of a whirlwind. Apologies for that. Anyone want me to cover anything in more detail, go back over anything, or any questions at the moment?
So that was really interesting. Thanks, Mike. And I'm getting massive echoing.
Okay.
From somebody. So when I worked in Brighton, there was a lot of, and I think some of this stuff was being, GDPR was sort of really starting to bite at that point. So this was sort of a very live issue. We talked a lot about what's the user experience for anyone if you implement this work to the letter, which is the kind of sort of way you've described it, yeah. and I happen to agree with it.
Yeah.
So I'm not trying to undermine any of this at all.
Yeah. Yeah.
But what as a user, if you're going from one website to another, what do you actually get? What do you actually see?
Okay,
going from and you so you'd accept all the Brighton cookies, for example, all the ones that you want, and then you look on there for a bit and you do whatever you need to do. Then you move on to site 2, BBC or wherever it might be, and you get the same lot of questions again, potentially, and again and again and again. And I think we were just sort of, we didn't even really resolve it. It was just like, was this what the law was intended to create? Because that's basically what it's created.
Yeah, yeah, and I can't answer that. I don't think any of us here can answer that. But all we can say is that we need to be lawful.
Yeah.
And it brings me on to the patterns that I've seen, and I picked on a few. Right, I picked on Brighton just because. Now, this is. I'm going to try and characterize this without sounding like I'm judging. This is the traditional sort of an implementation that we would have had over the past 5 years or so, where the statement is made at the top of the page: by using this website, you are agreeing to our cookie policy. That's a bit like picking up a new device and it says, to be able to use this device that you've paid money for, you must agree to our terms and conditions. If you don't, the website won't function or your device won't function. So this is what I might call a fait accompli. This is, we're just telling you that we're setting cookies, and it does. You've got Hotjar coming in. There's session cookies coming in. Things are happening. So I get no chance to consent as to whether or not I want those cookies set. So that's what's happened on most websites for many years. Then we move on to the second pattern, which Sheffield have, which is where it puts the, what you might call the complex cookie options in front of the people to say, okay, you can choose all of the different cookie types and you can have a look, and lots of description, lots of text. Agree to selected or agree to all. That means that I can't reject everything. But also, it's preset Google Analytics cookies anyway. So there's a pattern there that is, we're trying to be letter of the law, but we think some things that are sharing information with third parties are essential. Therefore, we just do them anyway. I personally, again, risk averse with this data protection side of things. I'd say we don't set anything unless we can prove that it's essential. And Google Analytics isn't essential for the functioning of the website. My take, only my take. Then we get to Croydon, and Croydon have a nice solution, which allows people to turn on and off the different types of cookies. There are no cookies set prior to that choice being made. Well, there's an agreed cookie, but that's kind of the cookie to set the cookies by. So up until the point where I save my cookie settings, everything is still off. Nothing has been set beforehand. To me, that's the way that adheres to the letter and the spirit most closely.
Mike, I'm not sure if it's just me, but your screen, I'm seeing part of Brighton, part of Sheffield, and part of Croydon all coming through as if the screen hasn't updated. Like,
wow, has everybody else seen that, or are they seeing it properly? Like,
No, I'm getting the same actually.
wow, okay.
Croydon is nearly loaded now. I can see Google Analytics listed on Croydon, but
wow.
I didn't see Sheffield at all. I just saw the Sheffield logo and the Brighton homepage under it.
Okay. Is it loading? Do I need to try and refresh?
It was the same with the text. Was when you scrolled your text for the text document.
Yeah, I think the compression algorithm with Google Meet is having fun.
It's certainly trying to do something. Okay. Well,
I might turn off my camera. Maybe that might.
I've seen this on another colleague's actually, and he's on a Mac as well. So I don't know if it's a Google Meet thing.
Maybe it could be that I'm in Firefox and it wants to force me into Chrome.
Mike, though, do send a link to your notes and to these sites. I mean, I might just go through and add them anyway.
Yeah, no problem.
So people can refer. Just going back to the Croydon example for a second. Mm-hmm. So I think it uses, and Tom will tell me, the product manager there, a bit better. He's not here today, sadly, but I think it uses local storage for the hide on the alert banner, because unless you can set a cookie on that hide or save that preference in some way, the alert banner keeps coming back. And I think we judge that to be essential.
Right. Yeah, that's essential because it's good for the user, and the user gets to choose that. So they could leave it there, or they could turn it off, and it uses a cookie to remember their preference. And you're not sharing that data with anyone. It's not gathering data. It's very benign. Yeah. So those sorts of things, absolutely no bother at all. And I don't think anyone would even bat an eyelid from a DPO perspective on that. It's the two examples on the site here, Google Analytics and Hotjar. They are instances where you're sharing data outside of the country that you're in or the economic area you're in. So in both instances, I believe you're sharing in the US. And unless it's changed recently, there is no agreement between the UK or the EU and the US for data sharing. It collapsed last year. So you shouldn't be doing it without consent. Anecdotally, with websites we launched or changes we made to websites in Ireland last October, when this interpretation was sort of became the truth from the Data Commissioner's Office, we saw a 50% up to 80% drop off in Google Analytics stats for websites who had this implemented. That obviously causes a lot of issue because people get funding based on stats. And if your stats no longer can be trusted, you need to find an alternative. We haven't found one that's absolutely spot on yet. What we currently do for if we're hosting clients, then we use our internal to the hosting environment statistics gathering tool, which is similar to Google Analytics, but we're saying because we're keeping it within the data protection and what's the word I'm looking for? Not control, but processing. The data processing agreement that we have with the client. Therefore, we're not going outside of those bounds. And again, it's down to interpretation. One DPO might say, yes, that's perfect. We're telling people about this in our data statement. And another may say, no, that's not good enough. So therefore, we can't use statistics with that client. They may still use Google Analytics, but it's only the people who accept the Google Analytics will be recorded.
Yeah, I think what we're talking there, Mike, really is the idea of first party versus third party cookies. So if we take data about people and we send it to, and I don't think it matters that they're in the US. The fact is they're a different organization, so it's been sent to Google. Whereas what we do with our clients now is we take the data and we hold it inside the client's database only. So if someone visits Annertech.com, we can see who visits, why they visit, how often they're doing, but it's us taking data for ourselves and not transferring it to a third party to process for us.
We're not giving it away. Just to look at a little bit of implementation stuff. So this is the Irish Cancer Society's website. You can see that here, this has the cookies, excuse me, the cookie solution implemented on it. Hopefully it's updated on the screen. It's a different enough color. Maybe it'll spin it up. Mark, can you see?
We can see the black box with the...
That's the important bit. That's what I wanted to see.
I'm going to show the same thing in a few minutes, actually, Mike. So
yeah.
Okay.
So the black box. Oh, you're going to show this. Okay, I'm not going to take Mark's thunder away. But the other thing just to show is the list of cookies that we need to have here. This website uses quite a few cookies, and we have to list them all and keep that list up to date. So use a tool, use a third-party tool. I beg you. You'll lose your mind going through this lot of cookies every month. Ironically, it's another bit of JavaScript, but it solves a problem for you and it solves a problem for the user. The last thing I wanted to add was this website called cookieconsent.speed.run. Now, it's quite eye-opening because what it does is it uses a lot of the dark and anti-patterns that many websites use right now for accepting cookie consent or cookie consent and accepting cookies, and it turns it into a competition. So you can then start to see when people say double negatives about accepting cookies, it takes you a lot of parsing to figure out whether or not you should or should not be saying yes to each of the different checkboxes and options. But that's quite interesting. I just added that in there so people can have some fun with it later. I'll paste that into the channel. Mark, I've spoken a lot and I have a dry throat. Do you want to do a bit of talking now about the technical aspect?
I would love to, Mike.
Brilliant. I'll stop sharing.
Okay, let me share. This screen. Okay. Let me know when you can see my code editor and Firefox. This one here and this one.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep, thank you.
Okay, so what we've done here is we've created our own internal module called ANRT as an Annertech _GDPR, and we've then almost all of our clients use either OneTrust Cookie Pro module or Cookie Pro solution, let's say, or else uses CookieBot's solution. And when I say use one or the other, I'd say we're at about 85% of our clients or more even use CookieBot. In terms of implementing CookieBot with Drupal or just CookieBot in general, we found it much easier to work with. So what I did was I created then an ANRT GDPR module, which would create templates that we needed to be GDPR compliant for our clients, and we set it up that both modules, whether both solutions, whether you use Cookie Pro or Cookie Bot, could be serviced from one module. So what I've done is I've got this NRT GDPR.module file, and I do a couple of checks just to see that that if Cookie Bot is enabled, we'll add the Cookie Bot library. If Cookie Pro is enabled, we'll add the Cookie Pro library. We're going through a few different things as well then for something like if Cookie Bot is enabled, we use the Cookie Bot Facebook type thing. If Cookie Pro is enabled, we'll use whatever else. So this allows us to have one generic module for all our clients, and it covers about 80% or 90% of our use cases. If we've got something very specific, like we've got a client that uses maybe Google Maps or something like that, then we'll create another module called client name _ GDPR just for those specific overrides. So what we have then within this is I've created 3 libraries. One is a general GDPR CSS library, and that's the library that just creates this black or charcoal box and the white text and things like that. So everybody, no matter what solution you choose, that's what your video is going to look like until you've accepted whatever cookies. And then we've got 2 separate libraries, one for Cookie Bot and one for Cookie Pro. So again, Cookie Pro, that's the OneTrust version. So depending then on which you're using, these libraries get loaded conditionally. Then we've got some templates, and I've divided these up into Cookie Bot and Cookie Pro templates. So you can see that they're kind of similar here in that we've got the video embed iframe template. That's what embeds YouTube's and Vimeo and stuff like that. And we've got the exact same template in Cookie Bot, but both of these require different things to work. So within Cookie Bot, we have this text here that gives us the renew pop-up. So every time you click on this button here, this website uses cookies form shows up again. And with Cookie Bot then as well, you got the source of your iframe here, gets source equals, and whatever the URL of it is, youtube.whatever-else.com/something. Whereas with Cookie Pro, with the OneTrust version, it's a little bit different. You get a slightly different experience here. You need to create a specific button with a this kind of stuff. So this allows us to do that on a slightly differently, and then you get a different class here for the Optanon is the name of the function that Cookie Pro uses. Sorry, Cookie Bot and Cookie Pro. And they have an interesting way of doing it. What they do is instead of having your iframe source equals whatever the URL is, they change that to data -source, and your browser hasn't got a clue what data -source means, so it's not going to load anything. And then as you start accepting cookies, what it will do is we'll rewrite this. It will remove data -source and convert it back to source equals, and then the iframe can be shown. As well as that, then we've got SoundCloud here. It's pretty much the same thing. We've got the same kind of div and link that does whatever it does, and then whatever slight different parameters we needed here again for data source. Oops, sorry. To change where the URL comes from. And then they've both got this concept here of, this is the Cookie Bot declaration, and this is I just call it block Cookie Pro. And what this is actually what Mike was trying to show a moment ago, which is an automated list of every cookie on your website. So what it does is Cookie Bot or Cookie Pro will go to your website, scan every page on the website, and find whatever cookies it can find. And then a line of JavaScript will say, you can see here this div ID OT SDK cookie policy. It will look for that ID there, and it will inject as in HTML the list of all of the cookies on your website. So this is the Irish Cancer Society one. So we've got Stripe, we've got our cookie consents, and that goes on and on and on. You can see there's quite an amount of cookies. And to try to remember that list and maintain it and update it and keep it going yourself, it's virtually impossible. So you really need to have an automated tool that will scan this once every 2 weeks or once every. You can see I'm still scrolling here, and not alone about it being virtually impossible to look after. It's just, I'd say, well, I'm presuming infinitely boring to have to look after that as well. So in Cookie Pro, we've got these divs and classes specifically on this block, and then we place that block on the page. With Cookie Bot, it's a little bit different again. So there's just a small script goes in here, and this script itself then will actually go and get this information. and pop it where it needs it. Then we've got similar to that. Then we've in our source directory here, we've got some plugins for blocks fields and video embed field. So this depends then on the way Drupal has done. Some things is in templates and others are in event subscribers. So again, this is just rewriting the Facebook embed template to allow for cookie consent opt-out marketing class, so that we know then that the div will be hidden until the cookies are accepted. And the same, then you can see this just a JavaScript renew button that was on top of it. So it does the exact same thing as what you saw in these templates, except it's written in PHP, what are these plugins. And the same then with, we got a field one here for the embed formatter for, I don't know which one this is for, to be honest. I think this could be for all embeds using cookie bot. It's about 6 months since I wrote this, so I can't remember exactly, but that's the kind of thing it does. And then the block one here is the cookie pro block, which is, it just creates a block which has an empty string of markup in it. And then inside this block here, what gets embedded is the cookie pro block cookie pro. So this will end up getting rendered inside it. After that, then once you accept your cookies, so let's say you're on Laura Lynn's website here. This is a children's charity, children's hospice, sorry, in Ireland. I think it's the only children's hospice we have for thankfully, or hopefully we only need one. So this has got a video here in the background, but you can't see it. So if we inspect the source here, you'll see here, this is the div ANRT cookie consent opt-out and cookie consent opt-out marketing that we saw a second ago at where is this level here. And then that creates the iframe that's beside it, and it says that then where we saw source equals a moment ago in our iframe, that is being converted here to data cookie block source equals. Now, if I
There's
won't
a couple of hands up there, Mark. I don't know if.
Oh, sorry, someone wants to speak. So.
Okay.
Okay, so I can't see any hands up because my screen is blocked by my what I'm sharing here. But I'll be finishing about, I'd say, less than a minute, so we'll take questions then maybe. So I won't go through accepting these one by one. We'll just say we allow all cookies, and what we'll see is that this data source here will change to just being source like that. So we'll allow all cookies, and the page refreshes, or that div refreshes where the video was. And you can see now we're down to having source equal, so the browser can interpret this and show us the video. And then we've got a small bit of JavaScript again for cookie bot and cookie pro. But all this does here is creates this small little floating widget down at the bottom for cookies. So at any stage on any page of the website, you can click that again, and you can decide that I want to remove whatever cookies I want to remove, and this gets hidden again. So we're back to being GDPR compliant. And we can turn that on or off on whatever pages we wish. I think that's all. There's not much point in looking at much more code. So if we have any more questions for me or Mike, we'll take those.